may include risk management strategies that may need to be implemented to the permit application be approved. Then we've got inspectors which ensure compliance with permits that are approved under the GMO Act. This slide looked familiar as it was presented yesterday to show the whole process where you submit your GMO application at the Department of Agriculture to the registrar who checks if the application meets the requirements of the GMO Act. Then his application are sent to advisory committee composed of independent experts who will then evaluate and advises the executive council, which makes the final decision on whether to approve or reject the application. Another act, which we call the National Environmental Management Biodiversity Act, the member established in 2004 to monitor and report on environmental impacts of GMOs that are released into the environment in South Africa. This function is performed by the GMO Research and Monitoring Unit of SANBI, the South African National Biodiversity Institute. The member also establishes a mechanism where the Minister of Environmental Affairs may request an environmental impact assessment of the GMO under the National Environmental Management Act of 1998, which we call, in short, NEMA. NEMA provides established general principles for decision making with regards to activities that affect the environment and promote cooperative governance. As far as I know, we haven't, to date, an EIA for GMO has not been required under NEMA, and consequently, an EIA under NEMA has not been conducted for GMO. However, if an EIA, environmental impact assessment of a GMO, is conducted under NEMA, and the outcome is that a particular activity is deemed acceptable to the Executive Council of the GMO Act, nonetheless, the EC retains the authority to make the final decision on the granting of the permit. However, if the EIA conducted and it is said to possess an unacceptable level of risk, then the Executive Council may not instruct the register to issue the permit. We are also governed by international regulations. We are a member of the Cartagena Protocol that focuses on living modified organisms for South Africa to ensure compliance with the protocol, to ensure that the required information to make an informed decision on the import of LMO is available prior to a decision on the import of LMO. The protocol also has established Biosafety Clearinghouse as a mechanism to facilitate the exchange of info on GMOs. To enable compliance under the protocol, this includes information on scientific, technical, environmental, and legal aspects of the transboundary movement of GMO. South Africa basically then will be able to access to such information. We are also a member of the Codex Alimentarius, which accordingly we follow the Codex principles and guidelines for evaluation of safety of food and feed derived from GMOs. These include a safety assessment of the food, considering aspects such as possible allergenicity, toxicity, compositional analysis, evaluation of metabolites, possible effects of food processing, nutritional modification, and other considerations. Such an evaluation of food and feed safety is important when we are applying for a community import permit or a general release permit in South Africa. So to conclude, South Africa promotes GMO and GM products, provided that appropriate regulatory and safety measures have been adhered to as per the GMO Act. And there was an OECD survey of new plant breeding techniques, where a question asked was, is South Africa seeing any plants developed in the private or private sector? And the response was that mostly it was no. There was only one example, where University of Stellenbosch is developing systemic sugarcane with higher sucrose through targeted gene silencing in the private sector. There was possibly pioneer, but not aware of specific product. In the academic environment, there are many GMO crop studies, but none have been taken into limited field trials or to commercialization. These plants are studied in contained GMO-related glass house facilities. Few products reach the market. Also to know that none of the currently used GMOs crops have been developed in South Africa, only evaluated. And most of the new GMOs are generated by conventional breeding techniques using approved GMO crops, which also requires approval before planting and distribution. And most of the permits applications, as you have seen on the graphs, have been for trials of continuous, that is for research, development purposes, and very few for commercialization, which therefore implies very little IP and intellectual property accrues to the country. To address this as a way forward, the bioeconomy strategy then encourages South Africa to breed its own varieties and to harness from our own indigenous varieties. But then we have got variety of indigenous crops which are in a commercial stage, such as manatee, cowpea, and so on. So the strategy encourages the country to capitalize on such indigenous crops. And then to acquire new germplasm and characterization and maintenance of germplasm in the form of databases, to identify disease-resistant genes and characterization of genes controlling different traits. This will be done by setting up pre-breeding platforms and phenotyping platforms. The strategy then also will look at breeding new varieties for disease resistance, drought and heat tolerance, as well as the use of genetic modification for resistance against diseases and improve drought and heat tolerance. Then, as I've said, the new strategy then will take into consideration the entire value chain, molecular characterizations of pathogens, as well as development of simple molecular diagnostic tools have also been prioritized. This will assist with integrated control strategies for pest and diseases contribution, which contribute then to green economy, as we will be less relying on pesticides. We then go to establish reliable and repeat how-throughput screening techniques for screening, such as the potato germplasm of ARC, which is then the next generation sequencing for marker-assisted breeding. The strategy will also focus on development of vaccines and biologics. These are new avenues in terms of breeding, including biofarming technology initiative. The target is accrual of benefits to the communities, ensuring technology transfer, strengthening the value chain, and ultimately ensure that technology contributes to GDP and the economic growth of the sector. That was the last slide. Thank you.
Thank you, South Africa. Comments, suggestions, questions?
South Africa obviously has the largest economy in the Southern African region and also probably the largest middle class. And I also know that the media are very well represented. So is there any national, because you clearly pointed out what is going on the national level, institutionally, regulatory, but what about the public support for the whole thing? Is there any debate going on? Are journals reporting on what is being decided in the government, for example? is there perhaps societal unrest about the use of some GMO crops or not? Can you say something about that?
In South Africa, we have a public understanding of biotechnology, which is an initiative of government where they do all the public awareness on including issues such as the GMOs. Then we've got the Biosafety South Africa, which also then do sort of communication on the risk assessment and on technical issues of genetically modified organisms. I don't know if you've got anything to add.
The price is, it goes up and down. It depends on, it's typically one or two things that appear in the papers, and then there's a few comments, and then it quiets down. I must say the last time, and the other people in South Africa must comment as well, but it feels to me it's been very quiet. We've just had the ISB GMO meeting. I mean, we really published sizes very broadly, and there were so few things, even on things like Twitter and those. We got individual little comments that are basically, and I should just highlight that PUP, you now started by saying, we've got maybe a large middle class and things like that, but PUP did a survey. It's unfortunately a little bit outdated at the moment, but they're busy updating it, but about 4 or 5 years ago, in which they, just tried to determine the levels of knowledge in society. And at that stage, more than 80% of South Africans that they interviewed didn't know the word biotechnology or what biotechnology means. So not even touching on gene. So this is always one of my big issues, which I will elaborate on later. This whole public participation thing to me is an enigma. Because you can't ignore it from a political point of view, and of course we manage these things within political systems, so we should do it. But the concept of teaching the public to a level where they will understand and then appreciate biotechnology, I think it's not practical.
I would like to comment on Amy's remark, because I agree that it is difficult to understand that the general public, well, let me say, the general public often do not understand the scientific basis of biotechnology, even they do know what biotechnology means. That is true. I think that's also true for many people in the Netherlands. They do not really understand what it is. But what you see in Europe, is that there are a number of NGOs that have knowledge about biotechnology, and they have a quite different position with respect to it. And they are often functioning as a kind of, well, spokesperson, or they think they are a spokesperson of the general public. So the discussion is often not on does the public understand what scientists mean, but what does some influencing NGO say about it? So also the question can also be, are there influencing NGOs in South Africa that are responding to what biotechnology aims to do? On the other level.
There are about 2 or 3 papers that were written about media coverage on GMOs or on biotechnology in general in South Africa, quite detailed ones. And one of those actually refers to the role that NGOs play in terms of influencing the public perception on these issues. But the question that also that paper asks is, how much are these NGOs, how much do they know about the technology? Because I happen to know that some of those spokespersons know very little about what they're talking about. But some countries have had multi-stakeholder, multidisciplinary teams talking to these NGOs, and they've managed to some extent. I think Botswana is one example where I've seen that in your public awareness, public participation, they there was an environmental organization, I can't remember their name, being part of the team. And hence, when they then speak out there, they speak from a more informed point of view than when they have no information at all. And you actually say that public participation is possibly not practical. I do agree with you, but I also know that these same NGOs can cause a lot of noise that can delay processes, yet they are not necessarily well informed on what they are giving out there. So sometimes it's nice to be proactive and involve them and educate them so that when they speak from an informed point of view.
I think in South Africa sometimes they are invited, but they refuse to participate.
Anti-GMO group. And I mean, we know them personally, so we engage often at different fora, open things, even in front of Parliament, and it's a mutual respect to some extent.
I just want to find out the link between the Ministry of Environmental Affairs and Ministry of Agriculture in terms of issuing the permit. How do they communicate? Can Ministry of Agriculture issue a permit without a communication from Ministry of Environment, or I was lost somewhere there, maybe?
Council, as I've indicated, the Executive Council is a representative of different government departments. So the Environmental Affairs is part of that council, and the Environmental Affairs focus mostly on the impacts of the environment, the EIA studies. So they are new, they cannot work. I mean, the Environmental Affairs cannot issue a permit without consulting with the GMO Act.
The issue of public participation. To what extent did the public influence a decision in South Africa? Because that could probably also say why we have decided or choose to just remain quiet. Because if the inputs are not integrated, because that's what we also experience here in some of the public debates. People raise concerns, they talk about issues, but when it comes to the eventual decision making, that issues are not considered. So you just say, let me go quiet. It doesn't help. So to what extent was there a decision that was influenced through public participation, influence, and just for interest sake?
Yeah, the South African system, before we issue a permit, we always require the client to advertise on 3 national newspapers for public comment. So you take public comment into consideration.
Did it influence a decision?
Of course, if the public is not happy, then it will influence a decision.
Over tea.
But perhaps you can also talk about that court case. What organization was that took the department to court because they wanted access to information?
It was the older one that's quiet now.
You know why they're quiet? Because the backing, they don't have their own resources, these NGOs. They are backed by the Greens of the world. And they went into court, they lost the money, and even if they wanted to pursue it further, they couldn't, because they were now without resources. So those are the kind of issues that this whole debate and discourse has caused, division between society and external influence on how we then react to issues. And as long as we don't go the route that Prof. Nyang was talking about now, about Namibia case being really proactive and planning their own things, as long as we remain like that, we will always have these discourses and discourse that will be coming in, and external influence that will be coming in. When the external influence is coming with funds, you literally speak their language. And when they withdraw, you are stranded with your view that sometimes you are not well informed on. So these are issues that we may ignore as policymakers, as decision makers, because because some die natural deaths because they know there will be no more funds. But I don't know for how long they will be going on and, in and out like that.
Last one,
Ye-
then we hear from Swaziland.
I think what we're missing in this forum is voices from other regions of Africa. It would have been enriching if we've gotten a Kenyan, Ugandan, Nigerian, and so on, to enrich the discussion. The one thing that happened in Kenya last week was an emergency meeting by government to control the number of NGOs in the country. And they really came up with austerity measures to say, if you're in any NGO, you can only bring in 15% of the funds. You have to have 2/3 Kenyans on your board. They're really tightening up the screws. And it'll be interesting to see where this debate goes without that infusion of external funding to come and hold dialogue in Africa in the interest of whatever. So some of those funds might be drying up.
They have dried up.
They have dried, because 15%, what do you do with 50% when you've been used to lash funding?
No, even without that control by governments, they naturally have dried up. I was in a meeting last month when a certain group was trying to convince a certain donor for funding to do biotechnology, biosafety capacity building in Africa. And the donor actually literally said, look, show me the priorities from the countries in terms of what the African countries' priorities are like for me to buy into your idea, into your concept, into your innovative way of doing capacity building, for which many of our policies have not said much about biotechnology, about biosafety. We are quiet. We talk about biodiversity, conservation, and all other issues, but we are quiet on the biosafety-related issues. And hence, some donors have said until Africa itself has prioritized these issues, we are no longer going to continue funding capacity building in biotechnology and biosafety for the sake of you, the external provider, service provider, who thinks that Africa needs it. So they really have dried up in terms of capacity building, for example, in biotechnology, in biosafety. Many donors have folded their arms because we have not prioritized the issues ourselves as Africans. So probably you won't have many NGOs talking.
All right. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Last.
You're welcome.
My question goes to the issue of South Africa. If they do make sure that their neighboring countries are safe from their GMOs. This is in relation to the fact that you will find on the borders, bordering South Africa with her neighbors, planting GMO crops very, very close to the border. And by so doing, I think for sure it will affect the neighbors' crops on the other side. And also, how sure is South Africa in as far as the seeds themselves, if they are released from wherever they are released to be planted by that particular applicant, how sure are they that some of those seeds are not sneaked out of the country? There's just that concern.
Yeah, our GMO Act clearly specifies the minimum distance that needs to be taken into consideration. When you plant a GMO, there is certain minimum distance that you can plant from certain areas, certain plants, and so on. And yeah, usually in terms of the quantity, as far as I know, we issue the amount that based on when you submit how you are going to do your trials, it will indicate the quantities you will require to perform the field trials and so on. So we measure according to the size and the number of trials that are going to be conducted. And as I've also indicated, we've got inspectors. we also do go and check for compliance.
Just a brief follow-up.
Of seeds and things, living modified.
It's a very good morning. I'm Bongosi Dlamini, and I will be presenting on the status of biosafety in Swaziland. Now, it is quite difficult for me to explain all of this because I don't come from that discipline, but I'm only in entomology. So I'll just give a quick presentation, and hopefully my friend there who is a farmer and is involved in such issues will explain more. Now, the present, I will go to my outline. Basically, I will talk about the background, go to the Biosafety Act, the institutional arrangement, what the Act regulates, the key components, the current situation, and other biosafety activities and initiatives. Now, going through the background, we developed a national biosafety framework in 2005, and then we acceded to the Cartagena Protocol on Biosafety on the 13th of January 2006. The policy approval by Cabinet in 2006, and then we formulated a bill which started as Biosafety Bill in 2006. Then we went through with the Biosafety Bill, which was gazetted in 2009. Going to the Biosafety Act. Now, it was enacted in December 2012, hence called the Biosafety Act of 2012. It got operational in the 2nd of December. Now, the Biosafety Advisory Committee has been appointed and gazetted by Parliament, and we also have appointed the Biosafety Registrar. The biosafety regulations are being finalized, although we have included or it was validated by the stakeholder. Now, administration guidelines are being finalized, and an application for a continuous or field trials has been submitted, the first application. Now, I will go to the institutional arrangement. If you look, you'll see that we have the Ministry of Tourism Environment Authority, and then we have the Swaziland Environmental Authority Board under that ministry. We have Biosafety Appeal Board, which will interact with the ministry. Now, if the applicant wants to forward an application, it will go through the office of the Biosafety Registrar. Now, it will now cooperate public consultations, and then it will be forwarded to the National Biosafety Advisory Committee, which consists of biosafety specialists, crop specialists, and people in crop protection, which include pathology and entomology. Now we have animal scientists, law specialists, trade specialists, now NGO rep, farmer rep, which my colleague is one of them, then the food safety specialist. Now, actually, I'll just conclude what the Act regulates. It regulates the GMOs for contained use, GMOs intended for direct use by people as food, and animals as feed and in processing, and the international introduction of GMOs in the environment. which will also consist of the importation and exportation of GMO products and some other aspects. Now, the key components. Now we have the regulating of GMOs, which comprise of importation or exportation, handling and authorization, and the issuing of permits. So this first, it leads to the issuing of permits. Now the second component would be the adoption of precautionary approach, which include the risk assessment, risk management, and risk monitoring, which helps in decision making. Now, the public involvement will include public education, public awareness, public participation, information sharing, public access to justice, and then the busy age international information sharing, which helps in informed decision making. Now, when we come to monitoring, it involves identification, documentation, and labeling. Enforcement now looks at offenses and penalties, inspection, liability, redress, and appeal. Then I'll go to the current situation. We only import yellow maize into Swaziland, mostly by millers,